Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki tēnei hui. This is the workshop for recovered water management multi-criteria analysis, and it is being live streamed to the community, so I'd just like to remind councillors to please have your phones turned off. We have a time frame finishing around 3, if not before. I'd just like to start the workshop with a karakia and invite Councillor Waru, please, to give us a start off, please.
Tēnā koe te chairman. Kei noi tātou. He honora he korore ki te atua he maunga rongo ki te whenua he whakaaro pai ki ngā tāngata katoa āmini. Hanga maira e te atua he ngā kouhau ki roto ki tēnā ki tēnā o mātou. Ara hiti o mana ki te mai mātou roto i a mātou mahi katoa. E pai e ihoa e orana e mana ana i ngā tau mutunga kore. He whai korore ki tō ingoa tapu. Āmini.
Āmini.
Āmini. Thank you, Councillor Waru. And I'd just like to acknowledge the staff in the room as well as those from Te Tato who have joined us. They have an interest as part of their work with the Council on the Te Aroha Vision Committee, who also has agreed to help with this piece of work over time. Stavros is going to kick us off with a presentation that will go through the reason that we're taking this approach in the solution to our recovered water management, and then there'll be the opportunity for some questions and some potential feedback from the councillors as well, and we'll try and keep this as informal as possible. So I'll hand it over to Stavros. Thank you.
Technical level we have at this point in time. It is anticipated that the treatment process will meet all the known and anticipated national standards for water treatment. It will remove nitrogen and phosphorus to the level we have agreements of reducing to arising from the wastewater treatment plant. Once those levels of nutrients have been removed and other harmful elements will be captured by the membrane bioreactor processes, and the biosolids, which captures a lot of the emerging organic contaminants that are present in the wastewater, will be further treated through the UV treatment plant to remove all pathogens, and then it has to go somewhere for a final discharge. Now, historically, the resource consents enable the discharge of currently treated effluent into the Whakarewarewa forest via an agreement. Because the current treatment plant is not able to remove all nitrogen and phosphorus to the required level or pathogens, there was a need for those for further treatment through the whenua, through the land. By discharging to the land, further filtration and extraction of nitrogen phosphorus was taking place, and also the exposure of the effluent to UV lighting and sunlighting killed pathogens. In the next 18 months or so, when the upgrade treatment plan will be completed, there'll be no need for that because the treatment plan will be doing all that work, removing nitrogen and phosphorus to the required levels, and will be removing pathogens and as many of the emerging organic contaminants as we are aware of at this point in time. We have entered in 2020-21 an agreement with CNI, which is the Central North Island Trust that manages the forest, a Kawenata, on an agreement to continue to discharge into the forest until an interim solution was going to be found. That interim solution, the upgrade was completed. The agreement anticipated that it would continue to discharge into the forest, but not utilizing all the 440 hectares we're currently utilizing, but about 10% of that land, because we don't need the same scale of land for discharge anymore, because as I said earlier, the treatment will take place at the treatment plant itself, and it was just a matter of finding a place where the recovered water could be discharged safely and in a way that avoids erosion or other sort of landslides or inundating issues. We, through our work we've done over the last few years, identified that the mana whenua that will inherit the land from the CNI in 2042, I believe, they have expressed a view they would like other options to be explored other than discharging into the forest, even at a reduced level. Elected members, I believe back in November, December last year, provided an instruction to the Chief Executive to commence a further consultation and engagement process with mana whenua and other stakeholders to identify possible options for the use and the discharge of the recovered water that will come out of the upgraded treatment plant. That process of identifying and informing and engaging with the EUE leadership has commenced. The Chief Executive had, I think, at least 2 sessions with the EUE leadership, elected leadership and the Chief Executive leadership of all the EUE entities of Rotorua. We started talking to other stakeholders too, like the business sector and so on, because that advisory group needs to gradually be formed and lead us into a joint solutions or exploration in order to arrive at the recommendation that we come back to the Council in due course to be endorsed and progressed as in parallel with the completion of the upgrade of the treatment plant. In order to do so and set the ground rules or suppose the key objectives of that solution exploration, it is quite important for us as officers to talk to you, because you, at the end of the day, as elected members, you are the owners of the wastewater treatment plant. You are at the moment in stewardship of an investment made by the communities over many, many years. You all actually have the ownership and responsibility of meeting regulatory compliance issues, and therefore your views and thoughts and inputs would be sought through the workshop to define the main criteria for which we will pursue that option. If we don't have this framework of criteria, it'd be very hard to evaluate options against what. So we need to define what are the criteria through which we are exploring that. And of course, you are the first port of call here today through this informal workshop to discuss in an informal way and seek your opinions. I sent to you last week some preliminary explanation of what we're trying to achieve today, to give you some context to the whole process. And I would appreciate it, I think we will all appreciate today, if we focus on 2 or 3 key topics today, to explain what the multi-criteria are, what do they involve, to seek your opinion as to whether those multi-criteria capture more or less what would you like us to capture, to give us some inputs and some your thoughts and your feedback as to whether the level of stage 1, i.e. a potential solution, should meet certain technical criteria, and if they don't meet these technical criteria, it's a pass or fail. For example, if we need to discharge significant amounts of water into an area that will cause erosion or landslides, that's a technically fail. If we're going to discharge something in an area which is really contrary to regulations, it's a fail. So these are the technical elements, and especially in the areas of technical feasibility assessment. Then as a stage 2, we have identified a set of values, and those values are really not easy to define all the time in pure box elements. To some degree, those values can be interpreted by different parties, by different people, and rightfully so, and respectfully so, from their own individual perspectives. And I think we need to be respectful of that and making sure that as far as possible, when we decide those kind of levels of criteria, we have at least a common understanding of what they mean and how we evaluate against them. And each one of them will be given a set of weighting. So we say not everything is equal. At least that's what multi-criteria assessment means. Every criteria has got a certain weighting, and when you total the weighting, it gives you the right proportions to make an informed decision in the future. So we'll appreciate your input into that. We'll do our best to be as informal as possible, but the purpose of the exercise today is actually to seek your views about it. So, again, this is a brief explanation of multi-criteria is. It is used for quantitative and qualitative yardstick to compare different alternatives and options. And the MCA must be, to the eyes of an external party, transparent. And it's to say, yep, I recognize that in transparency, I understand the intent behind that. And obviously, it's very difficult to assign a black and white value to something from an individual perspective. It needs to enjoy what I call a social license behind it. In general, does the community agree to this kind of, of criteria? Next, Jonathan.
Just can we hold there, Stavros, if you don't mind? We're pretty informal here.
Yes, go ahead.
I just wonder, I think this is, it's good to understand, maybe even just around the room, how familiar everyone is with this kind of system, and if we want to talk more about what is a multi-criteria analysis, because I observe that this isn't something we have, well, in my time here, we haven't seemed to have used this much, but it is quite a industry standard tool both in New Zealand and globally. So again, I'm happy to spend a bit of time talking about this if there is a need around the table. So just want to make sure we don't move too quickly with this as assumed knowledge. Do you want to unpack it anymore? Or?
Comfortable to move forward, councillors?
Okay.
That looks like.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Again, as I said earlier, the identification and selection of various discharge options is a complex problem. We have, over the last 2-3 years, done some preliminary work onto that to identify some potential options for that. But obviously now, putting aside this kind of locations-based solutions, the purpose of today is to seek your thoughts and guidance with regards to the multi-criteria analysis and the baselines we propose. So once we have agreed, the baseline, we as officers and individuals, when we talk to our partners, when we talk to other relevant parties, we have a common base of understanding as to how we evaluate these various options. Okay. Again, as I said earlier, the project treatment plan will be completed, be operational in mid next year, and will supply a significantly higher quality fluid or recovered water to the existing, to what we can get from the existing treatment plant. As I said, we continue to discharge into the CNI, the forest, Whakarewa forest, until under the section 1 to 4 of the RMA, until we are able to identify a solution or commission a new discharge. Application or solution.
Stavros, can I just add something there? So this has been a pretty cornerstone element of the RMA regime, that if you apply for a consent If you've got a consent, you apply to renew the consent within 6 months, 6 months before that consent expires. You're allowed to keep operating until that consent process works its way through. When I was at LGNZ meetings last week, the briefing from DIA officials and Tamatarawa, who are leading the work to publish single wastewater standards across New Zealand, indicated that as part of the RMA reform process, this ability will be closed. So there'll be a grace period, but after that period is over, any existing consents need to be granted or they will cease. We will not be allowed to effectively indefinitely operate under previously existing consents. So there's two policy levers the government is applying. One is making single wastewater standards common across the country so that there's less discretion for consenting authorities, such as local authorities or regional councils. But on the other side, they're saying, well, we're making it easier for you and clearer for you, so you need to actually get these consents rather than go through many year-long processes of applying for them.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, just on response to what the CE's just said, could I ask how does that leave the following council, or one in the future? Does the fast-track process available, or even if it is available, those standards still need to be met, hence why they're standards, I suppose?
Yeah, that's one of the questions that many councils are asking, and the answer we got was the fast-track consent process is another path to a consent. So however you get the consent, you get it. They don't mind which path you take, whether you go through a usual process through the RMA or you apply for a fast-track process. When the RMA reform is complete and these standards are in place, we just won't have any other option except to get a consent, however which way you do it.
Thank you. So I'm sure you're not proposing a decision one way or another, but in terms of, is the fast-track option available to council for a project such as this?
Sorry, I didn't understand your question. So the fast track has a number of criteria, and one of them, I'm not sure exactly what they are, but is this the one that needs to have regional significance before it goes through fast track? There's a range of criteria. So the fast track is open to councils as well as the private sector, so we could pursue it, but there would need to be other thresholds we would meet before it could fall into the fast track.
Thank you, and I take it as part of that process we would have to be identifying what our option, what our desire, whatever option we decide.
Yes.
One of the,
thank you.
sorry, just to jump in there, the government is developing the so-called national standards criteria for the quality of, treated effluent, recovered water. Now, the idea is that would be universal standards, and it identifies that if you achieve those standards, you can discharge in that environment, in that kind of environment, and so on, okay? The regional councils historically around the country have used different criteria. So one of the reasons of setting the national standards is actually to economize, to minimize this kind of unnecessary complications and costs. Submissions made by the sector to these development standards, it suggests that those standards should be universally applied, and the regional councils should not have an ability to demand exceedance of those kind of standards. Understandably, regional councils have different views. They still want to be the abiders of what standards to be applied for. But we anticipate that the national standards will be passed through appropriate legislation, and obviously these are the yardstick we will aim to achieve. For your knowledge, to the level of standards we know at this point in time, that's going to be part of the national standards. The upgraded treatment plan will meet and exceed those standards in all respects. But there is an issue of consent required by a landowner. That's a different story, which you still need to work through the landowner. If you're going to discharge in someone's land, then you need to have a conversation with the landowner to get, to secure their permission to achieve that. Okay? Rob?
And sorry, Stavros, there's just,
Sorry.
sorry to pause you. There's another question from Councillor Patterson
Oh, sorry,
here.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just, I guess, drilling down into the question of the actual treated water itself, from what I can read in the community, some of the biggest pushback on this concept is they don't understand what it is.
Yes.
So what's the difference between what we're doing now and what this new level will be? What will the water actually be?
Well, there are four major differences. One is quantity-wise, we'll be able to treat a lot more than we currently treat, double that capacity. We have made a commitment through the Rotorua Lakes Strategy Group to reduce and control our nitrogen input from sewage into the Rotorua Lake. And the limit we have agreed to set for ourselves about 30 tons a year of nitrogen. At the moment, our current treatment plant, as it is operating, reduces nitrogen to about 62 tons a year. And then we rely on the land and on the irrigation system to filter out the excess nitrogen and reduce it down to 30 tons. The new treatment plant will will double the nitrogen removal and stay within the specified limits of 30 tons a year. Phosphorus is the same thing. Our maximum allowable limits agreed is 3 tons per year. At the moment, we produce somewhere in the region of 7 or 8 tons a year, and we rely on land to do the filtration, and before it gets into a receiving environment. The treatment plant will reduce the phosphorus below the 3 tons per year. UV treatment to kill pathogens. At the moment, our treatment plant does not have a UV treatment. It relies on the exposure to sunlight to do that work. The new treatment plant will have extensive UV treatment filtration, for treated wastewater to go through UV and kill all the pathogens in the whole process. Our current the fourth element is that current treatment plant relies heavily on bottom flow, which is a sedimentation. We're going to have extensive membrane bioreactor, which is basically very microfiltration, very fine microfiltration that will screen out any of the known emerging organic contaminants, either to be captured in the biosolids or even to be filtered out and treated in the whole process. So these are the four areas. Quantity and nutrient removals, pathogen removals, and more extensive microfiltration of material that goes through the treatment plant.
Thank you. And just one more point on that. You touched on the UV treatment. I've seen what the UV treatment up at our actual drinking water facility is like. My understanding is that the UV treatment at the wastewater treatment plant will even be more substantial than that. Am I correct?
It will be the UV treatment and the combination of other filtration systems will certify the recovered water for any use except drinking, and that's basically because of certain unknowns into that process. But that recovered water will be to large degree, and no, in terms of pathogens containment, next to zero.
Thank you.
So the process, again, I don't want to read everything behind you, but basically the multi-criteria assessment process, it comprises 2 stages. One stage is that the filter out, identify first and filter out relevant factors that would preclude the solution from actually being feasible. Other practical things, as earlier. Does it cause erosion? Is it permitted to, is it going to do some damage to someone? Does it got groundwater issues? Do we have impacts of wetlands and things like that? And this is going to be pass or fail. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And where a pass for every metric is required for an option to proceed. So if you have a number of criteria, and it requires a pass for each one of them to go to the next stage. And stage 2 is run also in 2 parts. It's the values and scoring phase, where the important values are decided. What are the values we embrace, to be incorporated into the process? And identifying those kind of values, then we assign a weighting, a level of importance to each one of them. And again, as I said earlier, every one of us might have different views about it, but in order to embark into a positive and meaningful consultation and engagement with partners to propose some weighting criteria and some values assigned to each one of them. Next one. Again, step one is, we here try to identify in a little bit more detail of what are the technical criteria, which involves legal and regulatory compliance. If there is legal impediments to that or regulation doesn't allow you to do that, you flag it, you're not going to do it. Technical factors is about on disposal sites, and whether we can get to that site. Is it constructable? Is it within reasonable grounds? Do we have readily available technologies to do that? It's quite, I know I've been silly now, but it's quite important to say, well, I wish not to have pipes to get somewhere, to take the recovered water somewhere, but wishing and being able to do is a different story. Do we have the ability to install the necessary pipes and pump stations, to take it where we aim to go? And obviously there are going to be some geotechnical constraints, permeability of the soils, for example, an ability to build or access and maintain the system, and obviously to enable some future innovation. If you're going for a resource consent for that, it's going to be for the next 35 years. Technology evolves all the time. Technology creates new opportunities, and we need to have opportunity to take advantage of that. Again, noting that not that the above factors are only absolute factors. The two technical elements below are not so hard and fast. For example, we have a financial strategy. Everything you do as elected members in all spheres of your responsibilities relies on their ability to pay for it at some point in time. And you have a financial strategy. Sorry, thank you. You have a financial strategy which defines how much you want to spend on operational costs, how much you want to raise for your renewals processes, how much you are able to borrow to do new things. So the financial strategy, it's geared and it is calibrated to meet what you as elected members consider to be community affordability. So if a solution is found that requires another $500 million of expenditure, and I use a number for effect here, and is way out of your financial strategy, then obviously it's a significant barrier to pursue that solution. And so we include those technical elements to sit within the affordable financial strategy as agreed by yourselves, as you defined it. And obviously landowner approval. We simply do not have an ability, or of course we do sometimes through the Public Works Act and oppositions and so on, but in reality the ideal outcome is that if that solution is going to be sited on someone's land, we should be able to have an agreement with that person or with that entity or with that group, to do so. If the landowner says absolutely no, that is a technical, negative for those kind of criteria.
So hang on, let's spend some time dwelling on this, because just to be clear, and even when we discussed it among the staff and the executive team, there's quite a divergence of views, a diversity of views. So what I propose in here is that from a staff point of view, we think legal and technical factors are absolute, and we would encourage you to support that view or have a discussion about if you want to remove either of those two constraints. But there was more discussion, and I believe there is more discretion about whether you include the following two. And so I think this is the purpose of this, one of the key purposes of this workshop, is to say, well, should those two be factors that outright rule out an option from consideration? And there's a couple of reasons why you might want to put them in, and there's a couple of reasons why you might not want to put them in. So reasons why you want to put them in is obviously if it fits within the financial strategy, then every option that passes through, you can afford. So the second stage of your MCA process, you're dealing with things you already know you can afford. So that's obviously easier. However, if you take the second factor and you say landowner approval, then firstly what we'd have to do is every option would have to develop to a much greater level, and then have a landowner discussion before you even get to the second stage of the process. So what we might find there is you're ruling out either a lot of options, or we're having to do a lot of direct engagement with landowners on multiple options, which ultimately may or may not pass any further. But we would have to do them in order to meet that criteria. So this is where it becomes really important to get the right set of criteria as pass-fail before you even go on to stage 2. So I think with some discussion, it sounds like we've got some comments, questions here.
Yeah, actually, I'll open it up to the councillors just for some feedback. So if you want to have some comments, go ahead, Councillor Maxwell. And then,
Especially the last bullet point in the things that have been raised. Oh, can you go back to?
I'll just got it there,
Yeah,
Trevor, sorry.
yeah. You know, and like that first line, must be able to gain approval from landowner or owners. With that avenue such as the Public Works Act, I hope that we never go back to that ever again. That was the dark, bad, grey past. So, is that still available, Public Works Act?
Yeah, it is still exist, and they're reforming it at the moment to make it faster to be able to use. This is one of the government's reform plans, is the reform of the Public Works Act.
This is what really...
just... Oh, yes, so Mr. Walbrook's just clarifying for those that are online that the Public Works Act has actually been used just recently in the Wellington bypass as one example. So that has been used recently, just to answer your question.
That's a huge one, eh? Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's where there would be options, but everyone else is ruled out. Might be just the Maori landowner that has gone to, and then the Act Union. That just causes heartache and angst for years and years. And sometimes finally some people get it back. So it's trying to avoid that one there.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any other feedback? Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So that particular issue is a very thorny one. It's obviously been in the news with what's happened in Queenstown recently with discharging into the Shotover River. So we'd have to tread very carefully about discounting it entirely, but I do understand where you're coming from, that having it in that phase may preclude doing any other work first. So it's where does it sit? Does it sit right at the beginning, or does it sit after you've done more work on the proposals so that you've actually got something to go to the landowners with? Because otherwise it could be completely unfeasible and cause a whole lot of angst when it's never going to get off the ground in the first place. So it's a tough one.
No, Councillor, you're exactly right, and that's why it's important that you don't take what we've put on these slides as the way forward. Right, we really need you to kick this around and make sure it's right, because, as I said, even amongst the 7 of us, there was significant divergent views about whether this should be there. It come as no surprise to you that our CFO was very clear that no, it must sit within our financial strategy, otherwise it shouldn't be looked at. However, the flip side of that is that might mean there's a very good solution, but just as more expensive, that we don't even take to the next stage, right? that's what's tricky with landowner approval. As we've discussed, the hurdles to get to landowner approval are so high that you might see a whole lot of things screened out if that is a pass-fail criteria at the first stage. So.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, and I apologise if I'm jumping ahead. I have read the presentation, so apologies. Can I ask, is there at some point where we could perhaps look at the end product? So we're saying, well, sorry, is it okay to discharge into the lake? Or if we're saying that forest discharge, similar to what we do now, but obviously much reduced, as Mr. Michaels has said, would still be environmentally acceptable, even if the position or the location of that spray is changed to another location? Are we saying that those two options, sorry, particularly the forest one, even if it's not that particular location but somewhere else similar, is that still environmentally acceptable?
I would try and answer that question. So we're trying to do this in 2 stages, and the first stage is come up with a framework with which we'll evaluate all options, including that one. So what we're trying to understand is what are the things that you want us to consider in this framework so that we can have this discussion with this broader group that you've asked us to have a discussion with, but also with you and with the following council, so that there's some clear, transparent framework with which we've assessed all of these options. So that's what we're trying to do. To answer your question about is forest discharge going to be one of the options? Yeah, I expect it will be. I expect it will be one of those options. And then you might have sub-options to that, right? So that's an overall option, but, sub-option might be in that location, another sub-option might be in another location. Yeah, that's how we would expect to generate those options.
Thank you. So forgive me, so I'm not putting words in your mouth. An option could be for us to find forest land somewhere else?
I don't, at this stage, I can't rule anything out because we haven't agreed on the criteria on which you're going to rule something out. So I wouldn't be able to say that, yes or no. There isn't an active option we're considering. I'm not working on an option to forest discharge anywhere in particular because, again, I don't want to work on options until I've got a framework for how you're going to look at them.
Yeah, I sort of see plus and minuses both sides, whereas, I don't want to waste a lot of time where we're looking at frameworks for Africa on options that are never going to be feasible for us to, but thank you for your answer. Thank you.
Totally get what you're saying, and I guess that's the part of this very first stage is to try and get to a point where you have options that are feasible, technically feasible, meet their regulatory requirements, and also maybe those last 2 factors as well, depending on what your guidance is to the staff to go away and prepare options for going forward. So if you're comfortable with only the first 2 factors as the first screening stage and leave the others to later, or whether you want a version of all of them, it would be helpful to have your feedback on those things. So I don't know whether you want to do that now or whether we move on to the next stage. Yes, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Just another, I guess you could say, procedural question regarding this process. If we come up with an acceptable model to use, to follow, is this applicable only to this subject, or will it then become the template that's rolled out across any other subject? Because there may be different views on, let's say, the thorny one, landowner, that might not be applicable for a different type of project, but this one certainly does. So,
yeah, oh, look, this is for this topic. If
only.
it's wildly successful and there are some learnings that move on to others, then we'll maybe try and use it then. But certainly the intent now is just for this topic.
The intent. The
Yes.
intent. Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just to further clarify, as I understand it, we're just giving some of our feedback that will be captured by staff and put into options in a decision-making paper further down the track. So this is just giving some guidance and steering today.
Yeah, I think there were some other questions.
Was there anything else? Yep,
Maybe more a comment.
sure. Go ahead. Councillor
Well,
Waru?
you probably already know what it was. I'm anti-Public Works Act. That to me is I understand why it's there and that it's legislation in there, but that is a bad way to go. I think getting the approval in general, Māori land will always be easier. It always has been. It's been like that since way back, and it still is. I'm guessing, will there be options, let's just put something forward, that maybe we look at a farm that's not Māori owned, and we plant it out, whatever the timeline is. Would that be considered an option?
I think, as I've tried to say, is that I think once we get your criteria and your framework, we will gather all of the different options and run it through this process. So I don't have any basis to say no to that option because you haven't agreed any criteria on which disqualify it. So
I know, I'm just really...
we're starting with
talking
a
about-
really wide, just to be clear, we're starting with
Yep.
everything in and then using these filters to screen things out to get to some viable
Screen out
solutions.
Public Works Act, in the Works Act.
That-
I'm
so-
just saying too, because
we're
you've
not
already
saying-
you've already said at the start, through you, Madam Chair, that sorry, it was Stavros who said, there's been already an agreed timeline from the current, the current operation that we have now at the moment, with putting it into the forest. CNI have already given a timeline. Therefore, you have a timeline to come up with something other than that, because they said they want it out. Not sure if that's 100% or whatever, but
Yeah.
I'd say that that's pretty clear. And I mean, we've been, and I say that on takutaha iwi, we've been putting up with the for a long time. So I just want to lay that out there, make it very clear from my point of view anyway.
And I just want to make it clear that at no point are we advocating use of the Public Works Act, right? At this stage, that's not what we're talking about. So, just to
Oh,
be
yeah, I
clear.
know that.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just
yeah.
saying it shouldn't even be a option. Kia ora.
Actually, just got a couple of comments from Mr. Walbrook. Thank you.
Kia ora. Through you, Madam Chair. I just want to flag that all of these options have different risk profiles, and one such around the Public Works Act will ultimately shift a spike in your risk profile regarding trust and confidence in your community, whether that's relationships with tangata whenua or community. Public Works Act, as it's already been mentioned, does have a strong history with whenua Māori, but there are instances in the, Dome Valley, I was thinking of the most recent Public Works incident, which is the big highway going through to Taranaki and through that valley. That Public Works Act was evoked across multiple different land titles, and the ramifications are significant for communities. So just flagging, all of these here have different risk profiles, and that might be something that you might ask us to do, to look into further, as to a simple risk profile of, if we trigger that, what does that do? Because everyone has a risk profile that you'll ultimately need to make a decision on.
That's when we come to the options. We're not talking about options today. Yeah.
Yeah, go. We'll keep going. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Councillor Kiriopa.
Thanks. Just on this, Council obviously has obligations under the Local Government Act to have processes specifically providing for Māori to contribute to decision making. I note in the presentation the goals of the relationship with mana whenua are described as being intended to capture the views of mana whenua. It also appears to me to predetermine the scope of mana whenua input, to sit within the quantitative space, and to determining parameters to ensure restoration of the mauri of the recovered water. Within the briefing document, it says, when the current upgrade to the treatment plant is commissioned in 2026, there will be a significant improvement in the quality of the recovered water. It's anticipated that the recovered water will be of a quantity that meets national performance standards. Also note, and those national performance standards are obviously established on the worldviews of the majority European population. I also note within the presentation it says we are all on a journey from viewing recovered water as an asset rather than a waste product, and Māori have well documented views on waiparu, dirtied water, or waimate, dead water. So a bottom line factor for hapu, iwi or Rotorua Lakes Trust may be that recovered water doesn't belong in our rivers, lakes or oceans, where we have cultural rights to protect our taonga species and food sources. So my question is, how prescriptive is this process in terms of setting the scope of iwi input?
I'll see if Paul has got any comments to add, but what I'd say is this was a process that was quite strongly endorsed by the iwi leaders that we met in the sense of having a framework for decision making, because they wanted to understand if we were going to go down the process of involving our iwi and hapu and PSGEs, other forms mana whenua would choose to express themselves, then they wanted to understand how we would incorporate that. So I think a framework is what I'm hearing is supported from the discussions I've been involved in. Do you want to add anything to Paul?
Kia ora, just to continue that, we were actually asked to do this and to present to do this process, and they sought for councillors to consider this in order for them to determine whether they even wished to step forward on the process of participating and helping us find a solution. Their view was that they have participated in many engagements and it's got through to the decision-making end, and often their views and their aspirations are bumped for things like financials or other priorities. So they sought to say, before we start this process, can you signal to us how you're going to share with us what's going to inform your decision-making process, so we can determine whether we even want to step forward with and walk the path. So this is at the very conceptual phase. So they are standing by to see what might come from these discussions, and then all of those obligations and legislative commitments, Councillor Kiriopa, we will be committing to on this journey.
A landowner approval. The preference is always going to be whatever you're going to do, not to use legal means, but to have, an approach by agreement, and to have a working example for is Rotoiti. Now, whether we're going to have the opportunity to do it here too, I'm not sure, but at least at the technical criteria here, we're saying it's preferable to have a landowner approval, to do that, agreement to do that, and to do have working example. So is that a criteria for us? We suggest it is, that we need to, whatever options we explore, to talk with landowners and say, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the devil's in the detail, right?
Yeah,
So
of course.
if we say approval, it could be interpreted to say a written agreement.
Yep.
To get to a written agreement, there's an enormous amount of work we might need to do before we even bring back to this council the options. Yeah.
Councillor Peterson.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, just Stavros, just one more
Oh, sorry.
comment.
Sorry, just carrying on from your kōrero there, Mr. Michael. Perhaps landowner concept approval instead of the too much detail, because if you have to go through too much detail, the time it would take would just be prohibitive. We'd never get anything done, and certainly not within the time frame that we're facing. So if it was a concept approval, just, yeah, we like the idea of that, or no, we don't, then immediately you know whether you can go to put the devil in the detail and get back to them.
Yeah, there might be no landover objection or something like that, rather than landover approval, right? There might be ways that we can massage that if what we're hearing here is that you want it in as a pass-fail criteria or not. But
And maybe some options around that are worded slightly differently to that as well.
Yep.
Is that, or is there other feedback on that as well? Councillor Waru.
I don't know about that. I'm just being honest, I don't leave it too wide for me.
okay.
But that's just my opinion on the matter. Look, that also understanding too what Councillor Kirupalanis has brought up too around the lake. Well, that's another set of corridor you got to have. So, yeah, I don't know if it's sort of, I don't want it to be too wide that at this, we can smash a truck through it. It's got to be some kind of, rangatira ki te rangatira kōrero. That's all I'll say.
Well, sorry.
Yes.
I feel like the responses to my question talked about that iwi agreed that we need a framework, and that's kei te pai. I'm not disputing that. What I'm concerned about is some of the wording that I can see that's such as the examples I gave, that that mana whenua input will sit within the quantitative space and determine parameters to ensure restoration of the mode of the recovered water. Those sorts of things, when I see them written, is why I ask the question of how prescriptive is this process in terms of setting the scope of iwi input, because like I said, if we're going to determine these proposed factors, these stage 1 proposed factors now, and iwi feel strongly that one of them should be this recovered water does not go anywhere near the lake. Is this process prescriptive in just saying, no, iwi will be having discussions within the scope of the mode of the water, nothing to do with these proposed factors? That's what my question is. If someone could answer it, please.
Yeah, I think, Councillor, maybe we'll get to that at stage 2, because that's where I think you're reading from the stage 2 factors.
Yeah.
So maybe if we
If you
get
go
to
to
that.
if you can go to the next, I think this is just a summary, of the criteria. And from what here at the moment, we need to do a little bit more work on to landowner approval, that concept there. So we note that. These are but the rest of them, I imagine that we have to meet legal and regulatory compliance. I mean, we can't do something that's illegal. We have to, we assume that fits within a financial strategy. If you want to exceed that, at some point in time, you need to do some conscious decision to depart from a financial strategy. Landowner, okay, let's work about what that means. But the rest of them are technical feasibility, groundwater, limitations, surface water, geotechnical work, permeability, accessibility. All these sort of things are technical limitations we cannot ignore. We have to sort of factor them into. You can't teleport anything anywhere. We've got to go somewhere through some material medium. So we think that's important. We'll go to the next one. I think stage 2 is again, this is for discussion here. The whole purpose of the workshop is to have these discussions. We have identified, some stage 2 6 values. One of them is the relationship with mana whenua is very important value for us to protect and maintain. And I hear Councillor Kiriopa's interpretation of how we give respect to that. Community acceptance supports, obviously, the rest of the community, all of the community has an input into that, and we need to understand, how their views, fit into the process. Next one. Mana Te Wai again, there are some there are intentions here to capture what we call, the Te Mana Te Wai, or the healthy water alignment, not to deteriorate the health of the water in any way. And again, the conversation we had earlier there too, it's just a matter of how we are interpreting, but the intention is not to do anything that will compromise the actual or perceived integrity of the water. Life cycle costs, again, whatever decision will be made today will be with the future generations. It's not just a capital cost today. I was talking to a colleague recently, which their council spent $250 million to do something that will burden the community for $20 million every year, each year for the next 35 years, when they could have done something much lower than that. So life cycle costs is decisions you make today that will be burden, that we will burden future generations. So it needs to be a consideration, it's a value, we believe. Next one. Intergenerational value, and including environmental outcomes for a 100-year horizon. Again, these systems are there with us for the, for the long term. And I think there is an appropriate view where how we think today and how our children or grandchildren will think might be different. So the question is that, are the fundamentals of protecting community health, protecting the environment, protecting the water environment we live in, are going to be shared with our future generations or not? And I think that important value to ponder over and ask ourselves, for each potential solution, how it impacts onto that. And obviously, economic water, economic value to the community. I think that was intended, to ensure that the cycle of using water for our domestic purposes, and then treat it and returning to the environment again, sometimes is seen to be as a risk, but also it's got an economic value. We can substitute other water, other activities by using that. Watering, reserves watering, we had a particular situation recently where, a certain golf club is asking us to use that water in summertime for irrigation, not your golf club. And again, instead of using potable water, might be worthwhile diverting some of the recovered water to water the golf grass, for during the summer period. So I think we need to think about what opportunities are there for that recovered water to be used in a way that it saves another resource. And I think these are significant values for us, for us to have. So these are the values, and the question for us to discuss today, notwithstanding that we may not have captured the words correctly. The question is that, are these 6 values important values for us to consider in actually assessing various options that may be available to us? We think they are, but ultimately you're our governance body here, and you do need to give us some direction to that effect.
Thank you, Stavros. Perhaps this is a time to just pause and actually have some commentary. So starting with you, Councillor Kiriopa.
Sure, thanks. Just back to the proposed factors. I support the landowner approval to be put up into the proposed factors, but I don't support the sits within the financial strategy to be put into the stage 1 proposed factors, and that's because I have concerns that the financial strategy, and I could be wrong, but it appeared to me at the time that it was based on being able to continue to spray. The numbers were set based on being able to continue to spray into the forest, which we know is no longer an option. And because that's no longer an option, if we base the numbers on that, then there's not a lot we can do other than put a wetland beside the lake, which was already, it didn't support. So for that reason, I think, I could be wrong. Well, it just seems you've got so much money, you can only got so much piping, and if we can't do anything past the forest, then we're stuck to the only other options appear to be an option.
Can I excuse me? I think financial strategy is a wider council financial strategy. Council has a revenue coming from rates and fees and charges, and we have access to borrowing money. So the financial strategy is trying to reconcile those two, revenue and borrowings, to be able to do the things we need to do. What do we say by financial strategy? And again, I use numbers for effect here. Please don't quote me onto that. If I had to go and borrow, let's say, $300 million to do a solution, but our financial debt room, debt ceiling is only allowing us $30 million or $50 million as it is at the moment, is not something that you would like us to take into consideration? That's what it's saying. It's not about that specific solution, Councillor Kirio, but it's about the bigger council's financial strategy. Revenue from rates, funds from borrowings, but both revenue from rates has got affordability levels, how much people can pay, and how much you can borrow is got borrowing limitations. So I think that's what we mean by financial strategy.
That's right. It's not limited to what the LTP has for this line item.
Okay, cool. And sorry, and I've just got a couple more things. In terms of the values, so the part that we're on, proposed 6 values. Within the briefing document, it describes whakapapa and connection to nature as variables that are not easily valued. And it makes me wonder what iwi expertise has actually been engaged to consider whether the multi-criteria analysis is the most appropriate framework for the project team to take forward into discussions with mana whenua. My question is, if iwi determine that there is a more suitable framework available that can value variables such as whakapapa and connection to nature, can the decision be brought back to councillors again for reconsideration and approval?
Thank you, Councillor. We're getting nods from over behind from the staff in that respect. Do you want to speak to that? Yeah, might just get a mic. Bear with us.
Kia ora. I think the first point I'll just start with is the way I'm sitting in this workshop is to hear from the governance. So all of these recommendations, for me, we'll take your direction. But absolutely, we've got the Rotiti scheme. We've got a scheme just across the hill in the Eastern Bay. This council worked on the previous term, the bed with the previous wastewater plant that obviously didn't go through. We've had lots of precedents already created where Māori values and whakapapa to that has been quantified and implemented in the management of water and wai. And absolutely, if governance directs us to do, then we can progress those for consideration at the decision-making level. So absolutely, I don't see that as an issue at all. But I'll leave that into the governance's hand as to what the direction is set.
Thanks. And can you stay there? I just got one more question. I note the value set by council staff to its relationship with the treaty partner is 15% within your little table, the weighting. My question is, are those value weightings set in stone with a councillor vote today or whenever we vote on it? Or are those values able to be discussed and negotiated with mana whenua once engagement commences?
To respond again, absolutely, we'll take the direction from the governance on those. Those were figures from a very quick workshop just to start the conversation. So if the elected members so wish to change those percentage values to increase that weighting, and also to direct us to go and have more conversations, or if elected members wish to go and have those conversations themselves to inform the weighting requirement in those MCA, absolutely, we're at your discretion on how to proceed.
Yeah, just want to be clear, these are not, the figures in there are for arithmetic purposes only. They're not values that staff have put forward as recommendations. We're just showing some scenarios, how they might be broken out. And we only did that to get the conversation going. We could have started with the blank boxes, but I suspect that would have been harder. So that's the purpose of it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Brien, you had some comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll just talk about the brief framework. So on stage 1, for me, I just have a question whether pass and fail like for the top one, it must fit with council's regulatory obligations. Fine, of course, that's a given. Number 2, sits within the financial strategy. An option must not significantly affect our rates and overall affordability. So forgive me, how does one pass or fail that significantly? So if it raises rates by 0.1, is that a fail?
So this is the table
That's
itself.
the technical stage 1,
And-
Andrew.
This one here.
Yeah, I think we need to correct that. So that's a yes or no. Does it fit within the financial strategy or not? So we shouldn't have that commentary
But
on
does it,
affect our
forgive me,
rates and
yep,
affordability.
so thank you for your answer,
Yep.
but doesn't that limit you somewhat? You know, if something was just outside, and you all know how I feel about overspending, but given the importance of this issue and how we want to try and get a comprehensively agreed, shall we say, solution as far as possible, I would still, as a councillor, be happy to look at options where something slightly moved. I can see David starting to sweat, and so will Thomas watching this and be throwing a pencil at the computer saying, what's he doing to me? But if it was slightly outside, I think we have to give you, especially at this time of a framework, we have to give you some space to bring us back options. You know, I wouldn't want to see something excluded, especially hearing the concerns of Councillor Kiriopa, just because it, you know, bang, it's $10 over or
Yeah.
$10 under or something like that.
Oh, look, Councillor, I can add to that by saying the second stage actually depends on the first stage as well. So, for example, we had quite an interesting discussion whereby if you didn't have must fit within the financial strategy as a pass-fail criteria at the start, then there was a suggestion that when you got to the second stage, the total life cycle cost should carry a higher weighting. So there are some ways, as you said, to not exclude solutions at the first hurdle, at stage 1, but then appropriately recognise the challenges of it when you get to stage 2. So absolutely, that would be one scenario where we'd say, okay, the hard limit of fitting within the financial strategy doesn't exist at stage 1, take that up, fine. But then when you get to stage 2, you put a significant enough weighting there to recognise the importance of finances as part of that decision. So certainly there was that discussion about giving us the flexibility by not putting in as a pass-fail criteria.
Thank you. And where you've got landowner approval, and I'm just following on from Councillor Waru's points, where it says council must be able to reach, and I love this phrase, a suitable occupation window with the landowners. Is that the same as price, or is it wider scope?
Well, they keep,
Because forgive me, is that a yes or a pass or fail? Because if what Councillor Waru's concern is about the Public Works Act, from my reading how you've worded that, that's effectively a veto.
well, if a proposed solution sits on someone's private land, whether it's multi-owners or a single owner, the owner says, no, don't agree with it, then I think that's, you know, a significant indication that it's going to be difficult, you know, to actually pursue that solution. As for your question, Councillor O'Brien, is that an absolute thing? You know, if an owner or multi-party owners say, no, we're not happy with that, I'm not suggesting it, but are you inquiring whether you should just drop it or you should just maintain an open mind to use legal means to get there?
Well, I'm not quite sure what your understanding of pass or fail is. Mine is that it's one or the other.
Yes.
And what I'm concerned of is that we could be closing you off, although I take on board, I've heard Councillor Waru's, but bear in mind Victoria Street, when we were going to have that bypass go through, we did that, and, you know, by and large, the Public Works Act is used for activities that
Community good,
benefit the wider community, i.e. roads, etc. Now, what I'm asking, how are you going to evaluate something as pass or fail on that? If you take Councillor Waru's view, surely it must be a pass or not.
Well, that's right, and that's exactly, as I said, this is the challenge with having that as a criteria. So, which is why we put it up as an optional criteria for you to have this discussion and get this direction. What I'm hearing is that you're struggling with that one, that it's not clear that that is something that you definitely want in, because you got a lot of questions about how we would frame it, whether that would knock off some options, whether we'd end up doing a whole lot of work beforehand that wouldn't be feasible, whether we'd raise their expectations. So that's all useful. That's,
Yeah,
I just want to
I think
say this is good feedback, because we too were struggling with how we would turn that into something actionable. Ultimately, what it needs to be, and when we bring you the decision paper, would be, yes, that's going to need to be either in or out, and with some clear definition of what it means to get.
I suppose for me, it's like whenever we finish our meetings, I always think to myself, what have we learned today? And when I think about what the experience, right or wrong, and I'm not ascertaining blame anywhere, when you look at the experience of Rotorua in the sewage scheme and Rotorua, what we've experienced, the relationship with mana whenua, for example. Now, forgive me, one of the things I'd be concerned about after our experience with Rotorua is, yes, we talk to the people with the mandate to make these decisions. How does that flow down, or how do we consult with those who perhaps whakapapa or are descendants to, but may not be in a decision-making? How does that work?
I'll hand that to Paul.
Kia ora, through you, Madam Chair. Those are very valid points, and going forward as a council, our operational procedures will absolutely be speaking with mandated officials, and we will be working closely with those mandated officials to ensure that engagement has gone past the boardroom. That'll be a prerequisite of an engagement process that this council will be changing into the future, because we cannot afford to have those instances be repeated. It's not about bypassing the mandated officials. They are still the elected group of officials, no, not too unsimilar to yourselves as governance, but it's about working with them to ensure that those communications on a project that we're leading or responsible for extends to the people, those beneficiaries or that community affected. And a really good example of that is, if I might add, is the decision that you made regarding the Rotorua Airport. There was a last-minute engagement piece that you directed the CCO to go and undertake, and that resulted in a last-minute hui, and subsequently there has been repeat hui regarding how they wish to operate, and that will be coming to to council in the future. But that's an example of us saying, actually, we need to ensure that the conversations happen in the boardroom, and then it went through to the community or communities.
Thank you. Just a final piece, Madam Chair, so that someone else can have a chance. I'm glad to see that the weightings in 2B are only indicative, because I see the first one only adds up to 90%, so I'm glad that's only, but never mind, that's okay. These things happen. Not everyone's got an eye for detail. But I do think that some of these things we do need to flesh out a little bit more as to how consultation, for example, the waiting for me, and I appreciate this is only an example, would be, say, if we had, say, 5 options, sorry, I'm just giving feedback for now, it doesn't have to be exactly, but shall we say more fiscally responsible through to the more environmentally where, say, cost was not the main objective, whereas the environmental side. I think if we had perhaps some staging down that way for us to, just prompt more discussion would be helpful for me. So just passing that feedback on.
Yeah, thank you very
Madam
much. Certainly they should add up, and they will when we bring you the paper. And yeah, the understanding is we're trying to cluster around some scenarios that are 50% life cycle cost. You can see that's one probably a CFO can get behind, and then there's one that's 25% financial cost, which maybe some of you who are more socially minded might want to get behind, and a distribution of the rest of the 75% amongst the different values. So, yeah, they'll reflect some scenarios, and then you might want to have some final tweaks. All right.
I think just again from in the concept of our workshop, environment, and at the moment, Councillor O'Brien, you asked a question: is that does that agreement mean to be universal? If there's no universal agreement for a particular proposal, it doesn't mean it's failed, And I think, going back to what my chief executive said earlier too, is that we also operate within a legal framework in this country too, and the recent decisions in courts, actually highlighted that actually the views of an individual might be valid, but are not necessarily a veto decision. But again, you as elected members, have an ability to give us direction at some point in time, depending on what the issue is. But the point is that we're seeking to set up as a value to maintain and reinforce the relationships, with people. We don't think we can avoid that. It's our duty to maintain and improve relationships. Then the question is that, can we have good relationships with everyone? Probably the answer is no. But at some point in time, we have to assign a value to it. The effort has to be geared in towards maintaining constructive and meaningful relationships with people. And as Paul said, it needs to come back to the council to do some extra effort or some extra input into that, so be it. But I don't think it distracts from the assignment of that value of maintaining relationships. Maintaining relationships and improving relationships is a good value in our opinion. We need to strive for.
Thank you, Stavros, and thank you, Councillor O'Brien. Are there any further comments on the values that have been put in front of us, or the weighting of those values that you might like to give some feedback to the staff on, please? Haven't heard from some of our councillors. Thank you.
Kia ora, te Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Waru.
Just, I suppose, the values that are in the get to play with. The weightings, I think, need a bit more work. That's just from my point of view. I won't go any further than that, but I just think...
Well, we're asking you to do the work and tell us what they should be. So, sorry.
Oh, I can give it the...
Yeah.
I don't know if you would agree, though, but...
Councillor, this is not something we can determine, right? So we need your feedback. I mean, if you want to have a go through you, Chair, I'm sure your Chair won't scribble on the whiteboard what you think the weightings should be, and let's gather your views that way, because we've just put some numbers up that represent some ways of thinking that are not based on a formula that's prescriptive. You let us know.
I think the headlines are right. My thing is probably all those things need to have some element of mana whenua, some element of te mana o te wai in it, i.e. wider economic value to community. Ka pai. Okay, so what's the mana whenua kōrero within that context? What's the te mana o te wai alignment in that context? I don't know if having a one-line thing works, but rather it be put over all the criteria. That's just my thing, because that's actually number one. If you look at it, because then we go down this legal track, and I know it'll turn into a big pakanga. I was going to say something else, but it will turn into something that we don't want.
Thank you.
But I think if you, by doing that, you show the respect to mana whenua, to mana o te wai, mana o te whenua.
I wonder...
I'm not too sure how that looks. It's just sort of coming.
Yeah.
I'm can't think of a instance I've ever done that. So but let's have the
different idea. There you go.
And thank you for that. I wonder whether once we get to a point where we've settled on something, it will largely just provide the basis for richer discussions and more directed discussions. So the discussions themselves will actually tease out a lot of these things that are being talked about here. I would hope that would be the case. But anyways, I will move on to other councillors. Did you want to say something, Councillor Lee?
Yeah, not so much on the weightings, but I've got a couple of questions about the process here. So what time frame are we envisaging here?
You're meaning with
by the
bringing
time
this
we
back?
come back from talking and engaging with iwi? Like, is it going to be in this term, or is it going to be next term?
I think both. So the process I see going forward, roughly, I don't have exact timelines because some of these things we can't quite put timelines on, is if once we land with the framework from council. That's our chance to take it back to iwi leaders, iwi chairs, who were very supportive of us having a structured decision-making process. I'd like to take it to the Youth Council. I'd like to take it to people who have other views around intergenerational, who can speak to intergenerational effects, and hear back from them. So I don't know how our mana whenua or iwi leaders are going to want to interact. Right? They'll want to see the results and then provide some feedback. Remember, we're talking about, we're opening this up to at a solution level. We're not at a problem level, not at a solution level. So Paul can talk more about the complexity where we've got about, well, mana whenua saying, well, who is mana whenua when you're talking about the solution? Well, we don't have a solution. We're talking at the problem level. It's really right up at the Te Arawa leaders level. So I don't have a time frame on that. What we do have some timeframes on, we've got a clear direction from CNI. 2026 is a date. We know that these wastewater standards are coming out, and we know that the RMA reform is coming out. So, and we know that our wastewater treatment plant upgrade is going to complete in 2026. So, the framework of I would like to land in this triennium, but applying the options to that framework will be something I expect in the next triennium.
So would the weightings that we apply be binding on the next council?
Councillor, I have to. I can't constantly hold things back for the next council. So if you make a systematic decision based on a framework and a methodology that's widely used in the industry and appropriate for this context, they might want to reevaluate. They might want to change some of the weightings, but they're starting with something that this council has approved as a system. So I think that's a sensible way to proceed.
When would the significance and engagement policy come into the equation?
Significance and engagement policy would come in at a decision. So remember, this is a framework for decision making, and at the decision time, council of the day will have to decide implicitly whether they accept that decision making framework or cast it aside, and that would be up to the council of the day.
But this framework wouldn't be binding on elected members or future elected members, would it? I mean, ultimately a recommendation would come through a staff report and we would make a decision.
That's right. That's right. This doesn't constrain, it guides.
But I think there is another element too.
Stavros, I'll just ask you to use the mic, sorry.
We do have an element too that, I think we need to be cognizant of. And again, it's just our opinion and views, we are discussing this in workshop. We have to operate a wastewater system. That's not optional. It's mandated in our core functions and to be done. We need to operate that system within the recognized and acceptable legal framework that regulates, that wastewater, system. If we fail to do that, there are mandatory compliance, compliance issues to be dealt with. So I think what we're trying to do here is that we need to find a framework for which, would allow the council to operate a wastewater system and operate it within regulatory compliance limits and within a set of criteria. So if we can wait for another election cycle, when do we start that process? And the problem is that we are running out of time for that.
Yeah, thank you, sir. What I'd also say is I'd be concerned if councillors didn't want to give me guidance because the decision would be made by a different council. You are the governors of this council until such time as you're not, and this is something that we need direction on now. So although the final decision will be made in due course by the next council, I'm still requesting and really requiring your direction while you're the governors of this council.
What are the RMA reforms? How are they going to affect this equation? What do we know about them? And
I can give you a brief summary of the timeline, but my understanding is that the final parts of the RMA reform will only be introduced at the end of the central government triennium. So they will be 14 to 16 months away from being enacted into law. And so likely any decisions around the consent application for this discharge would likely fall after that review process. So we don't know the exact wording of that legislative and regulatory framework, but we've been given some direction based on policy statements released by the government.
Isn't it proposing to reduce mandatory iwi consultation over this sort of issue?
I'm not aware of it to that level of specificity.
Thank you. Any further comments, councillors? Councillor Patterson, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just harking back to this morning's presentation, our pipes, we're hoping to have a lifespan of 75 years. What this will be doing is going to last, obviously, quite a bit longer than that. And what I'm concerned about is if we limit ourselves to bricks and mortar being constraining new ideas, you know, that things like, should we be pouring our world-class drinking water into our washing machines or onto our gardens when we have this new resource which up until next year would never have been available to us to use for what they call grey water, using for doing all of the things that should not be wasting our precious drinking water. You know, are we going to limit ourselves by going down a path of having a financial strategy that says, no, we can't do that because it's too expensive, and yet 30 years down the track they'd thank us for doing that because our drinking water our drinking water will become our most precious resource. If you look around the rest of the world, their resources are dwindling. Ours are not, and we need to protect that. So if we can utilise our grey water some way, surely that's an investment that should be considered. I know our pipes and infrastructure currently don't allow for that. So that would be a whole new level of investment to go forward. But looking at what we've got here, I first of all would like to say I commend you for even coming up with this. This is the first time we've even had a process like this in front of us, so I'll give that a big tick. And as far as the other thorny one for me was the landowner one, I absolutely believe it's vital that they are included in the mix. Doesn't matter who the landowner is, because otherwise we have a repeat of the last two efforts, and we don't want that again. You know, what is it? 3 strikes and you're out. This is an important decision. It's probably the most important decision we around this table will get to make. So we've got to get it right. And I think this is a good step in the right direction.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Maxwell.
That's right, it's huge. Probably, hopefully trying to be constructive, all I can say is somewhere in there try and work it so that the team take on board, strengthen the partnerships, because a lot of land in a lot of areas, Te Aroa or Māoridom will come into the options, bound to. And all I say is strengthen the partnerships so that we can try and work some of these things together. And at the moment, we were all aware that in the past there's not some good track records in the past and in recently, as Don is saying. So all I'm saying, make even Paul Powder's job a bit more easier to believe in the partnership, work hard on there. And for us now, we've got a generation coming through of young people that are not as kind as many of us and open. They've been going through universities, going through various areas, and they play hardball sometimes too. And, you know, for right reasons. So all I can say is, yeah, this is good bringing it forward because it chucks the minds ticking over on the things that are here. Thank you, Andrew. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor Maxwell, thank you. I'll move around the room. Anything you want to add at this stage? Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Stavros and Andrew, for the presentation. And I agree. Personally, I think that there is a slight overlap in some of the weightings, and I guess that's the difficulty, isn't it? Because when you look at relationship with mana whenua, I mean, I guess the intergenerational stuff comes under that as well. Obviously, te mana o te wai comes under that. So there is, there is a bit of that overlap. But I would agree as well, and thank you for bringing this to us. I remember in our previous training we had a similar thing brought to us around the waiting for local contractors, and including that, so that we give our local businesses a chance to take part in the works. So this work is incredibly important, and the benefits of this is going to far outlast any one of us. I think even me around this table. It's going to far outlast every one of us. So, like it's been mentioned around the table, it's very important that we do get this right. And I really don't think that we should be worried about whatever decision we make now, and how the next council will have to deal, however they will have to deal with it, because this is one of those things that is incredibly long-lasting. We're just here to steer the ship for now. The ship's going to continue to sail, and it's going to have new captains, and I think just to get to this point, are we looking to give some weightings later, or?
Yes, I think if you had got some broad commentary on whether you think the criteria are hitting the mark and the values, you're welcome to give feedback on the weightings if you like, or you can, as we leave today, we can actually jot down our thoughts on the whiteboard there as we go. But if you'd like to make any comments about any of those things we've talked about today, you're welcome to now.
Well, I really agree. Just going back to stage one, I agree with those that, there are obviously those ones that are critical in terms of it's either a pass or a fail. So the compliance, the financial strategy. I do agree that the landowner approval, that one's a bit more difficult, and if we have that discussion later on, potentially opening up those different opportunities and having that bit of flexibility. In terms of the waiting, do you want to be the first one to?
That's entirely up to you.
I think we'll give it a bit more thought, and we'll put down the number later.
Thank you, Councillor Wang, appreciate that. Thank you. I'll just add my thoughts as well as we go around. I see the absolute need for legal and regulatory compliance, and also the technical feasibility as stated by the staff's recommendation. Landowner approval, I think, needs a little bit more work on the wording and description of how that might work. I don't know. And also, I note Councillor O'Brien's comments on the financial, fitting within the financial strategy. There needs to perhaps either be worded differently rather than a pass and a fail, or put it more detail in the stage 2 analysis and add more weight, so that you get the, because there will be other options around the financial strategy, including other uses for the water and other things that might come into that strategy that might not be immediately apparent, I don't know. But so those two, I just feel like might need some more work, and perhaps the financial one could be bounced to stage 2 even and given more weight. And I'll leave the rest of it. I think we've incorporated the right values. I can't think of any others at this stage that need to be added. The weighting I'll just have a little bit more of a think about as we move around. So I'll move around to anyone else who might like to have a say. Councillor Kiriopa.
Thanks. I've already inputted into what we're talking about right now, but I do have just a couple of comments or questions around council process on this matter. Some of us saw the outcome of the last iwi engagement on this issue, where a working group was used to make a decision in isolation of hapu and iwi, and all support for that project was later pulled by iwi. We also, as been highlighted, saw the outcome of the Tarawera sewage scheme process, where the same type of multi-party group was used by council, and there were 2 iwi representatives, I understand, on that working group. My question is, because as we know, hapu and iwi make decisions collectively and holistically, how is this acknowledged and supported within the proposed process?
Thank you, Paul.
Through you, Madam Chair, we'll take into those lessons learned to design how the new process will go. Well, we haven't got that far as to how to, but absolutely those lessons learned around engagement, the setup of PSGs, project support groups, those information, we need to look at what's worked and what hasn't worked and come up with a new way forward to avoid those same issues repeating themselves. So absolutely, but thanks. I don't have a plan as such. Welcome feedback from those that might have been involved.
Thanks, and just one more, please, and which is probably for you too, Paul. I note within the briefing document that Council's obligations under the Local Government Act to make effective and efficient decisions on behalf of the community was included, but Council also has obligations under the Local Government Act to Māori, and they weren't included within the briefing document, and I just wonder if moving forward, given the significance of this decision, can council obligations to Māori be highlighted alongside council obligations to the community under the LGA within any future briefing documents and presentations provided to councillors to give context for any future workshops or meetings dealing with this kaupapa, please? Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback. Any further comments, gentlemen? Thank you. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I can, so on the very stage 1, I think, first may I congratulate the CE and our management team on what I think is one of the most constructive things I've done in my 3 years here. So I can't congratulate you or thank you enough. As far as stage 1, I think we've hopefully given the staff enough about some concerns. Today, I wouldn't be comfortable putting any weightings in under stage 2 because I'd like to see some of the issues that we've raised be finessed somewhat before I got to the point where I was comfortable putting weightings in. So I won't contribute to that today, but I just want to really thank the staff, and I just hope that some of the things that, have perhaps not gone the way we would have wished, that we learnt this lesson. Certainly from what I'm hearing, it's very positive. So I hope that continues with the rest of this process. But can I just thank, again, the CE and the management team for a very helpful and I think a very proactive process thus far. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anything further from you, Councillor Patterson? Or you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to say that I'd like to give the weighting a bit more thought. It's a bit more grey matter required for that rather than just writing it up on the board randomly. But as far as as I said before, the overall concept of what we're doing here, spot on. I think we're heading in the right direction, and I do like what's been indicated as in stage 1 of the process.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll move round the room. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be reserving my comments at this stage, I think, for a future occasion.
Thank you, Councillor. Anything further?
Recall what Conan had just said earlier. I thought that was wise. And this has been valuable because it makes us all think. I do want, I don't know if it's the appropriate place to make a suggestion, but because we're not making decisions, but a suggestion that any major projects that come along, that we do put an elected member of that term onto that committee. We did used to do that in the past, and it just helps, it keeps us in the loop a bit more. Otherwise, we're not in touch, and we're reading in the newspapers or here, or else, and then I can leave Stavros alone and say, Stavros, can I have the minutes for that so-and-so meeting? And he kindly gets it for me. But things like that, I'll give one quick example. In the past terms, Mark Gould was a representative there, and he enjoyed us asking him, well, what happened there, what happened there? Keeps us in the loop a little bit. But of recent years, I don't know if it was a policy or what happened, but we never had a current rep on that on there, and I think it just helps us be a bit more in touch. Kia ora, I'll leave that with you.
Yeah.
Kia ora, thank you.
Sorry.
do you-
Oh, no, I was just going to say, thank you, Councillor Maxwell. I think we will be doing that for this one. We are doing it on the museum. We're doing it on the museum exhibit. We've got councillors on the short-term rental accommodation steering group. So, yeah, certainly that's my intention, is as we get some of these processes a bit more tidy, there will be the opportunity for that. Yeah, thank you.
Nice. Councillor Waru, any further comments from you?
Thank you, Te Tiamana. Had a bit of time to have a think about the rākau was going around. But, you know, I look at these components in terms of the values, and I think maybe a suggestion is that if one wasn't done well, whatever that might be, which one would be, I suppose, the one that, which ones, in order, would be the ones that keep the project from moving forward. I'm just looking at it from that point of view. And I think, you know, there's the economic value and there's intergenerational life cycle costs and things like that. So I suppose really, if you don't have where you're going to go, no location, no go. So, no dealing with the mana o te wai, no go. So I'm just sort of looking at it from that point of view. Where are I suppose, the most likely components? What are the most likely components that will handbrake anything moving forward? I've sort of scribbled something here that I'll just take a photo of and send to Paula and all that, but that's how I think you'll come up with the weighting. A better way of coming up with the weighting. I see in the one we've looked at here, it's kind of spread nicely. Heavy, I think, there's one thing with the 50% is the total life cycle costs. You know, I'd like to see a bit more thinking around, you know, you're coming up to a generation now who are going to start talking commercial terms. And I think there's still the better way to go, to be frank. When I look at, you know, we just spoke about what's happening over in Taranaki with the Public Works Act. Yeah, they've invoked it, but there's 14 court cases gone by. There's millions of dollars already being spent. Now it's because it's taken so long, the cost of the whole project has gone up another 46 million. So, you know, there's all those things we need to take into account. And I think if we look at it as a whole, we'll find a way forward. Also, I'd like to mention, I think we need to be cognizant and bring in our Te Tatau o Te Arawa partner into this this conversation, as I'm glad Kayla's here at the moment. So, you know, that might start things off a lot bit smoother, helping out with Paul's team and with Te Aomorangi and all that. Because it's a big one. This is huge. It's always about water and waste. There's always be that huge thing everybody likes to contribute to, but nobody likes to deal with. So I guess that's my whakaaro for now. Haven't got any numbers for you, sorry Andrew, but I do have I did offer up some kind of way of maybe how you might want to look at it. And I'll take a photo of that one and send it on. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. And a final comment from Councillor Wing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just very quickly as well, I do really agree and thank you for putting in the intergenerational value as well, because again, like this is an asset that is an intergenerational asset, and the benefits and the outcomes of it will be lasting for a very long time, and it's about, as we've talked about before, the changing the story of what we're doing here as well. It's really love how it's gone from, you know, wastewater, and now we're talking about recovered water, which is what it is, and the other value of the wider economic value to the community, which again will tell its own story as well of the benefit to the city. So just with that, I do agree with those values, but like the others, I think the weightings do need a bit more consideration before we make that decision.
Thank you, Councillor. And we'll actually, probably is a good idea if everybody gives their feedback through email to Andrew or Stavros on those weightings in the next week or so, timing-wise, Andrew?
I think don't want to rush you. There are some things you clearly are mulling over. So can we take away from this, and I'll reconvene with the staff, see what we can progress, see what we can flesh out, and then you'll get an update by email, and then we'll bring it to a further discussion. So.
Thank you. And Stavros?
Yeah, well, thank you, members. Can I push a little bit back? Really, I will acknowledge the feedback on the
Thank you, Stavros. And I know I picked up a general appreciation for the values that were there today, but perhaps if there's anything specific that you have concerns or comments on, could you please provide those? If there's no further comments from staff or elected members, I just want to say thank you for engaging in this process, and thank you for establishing this framework for us to feed back into. It's been very enlightening and hopefully really helpful going forward for the process. So on that note, I'd just like to ask Councillor Waru if he'd close us with a karakia, please.
No problem. Kei nui tātou. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa te ata whai o tō tātou ariki ahu karaiti. me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu ake, ake, ake. Āmene.
Amen.
Thank you, councillors. Thank you, staff.